GCPD, The Blue Wall, issue 1, John Ridley writing with Stefano Raphael on the art. So I really want to try this out. I almost didn't have time, but Matt was running late. So I was like, I'll stick another book in. Why not? So this is John Ridley, who obviously does I Am Batman and whatever. This is obviously, you might hear the title and go, is this like a GCPD book? Kind of. It's so Montoya's in it, and Montoya's the commissioner. It starts with her giving a speech to the new cadets who are graduating and are about to become police officers. And then our other main characters, the main one is Park, who is a young woman who is a new police officer, and then her two friends from the academy are other two characters that we kind of follow. But she's the main one. Park is the main one we follow, and Park looks up to Montoya and kind of respects her and is inspired by the fact that she was this beat cop who became a detective who then became commissioner. And Montoya is like seeing Two-Face like in the streets when he's not really there. She's having these like moments where she's seeing him. But this is clearly a hard hit, and there's actually a disclaimer in the first page about using racial language. I don't think I remember any from this issue, but there's a disclaimer which clearly means they're going to do it at some point in the book, and they're setting you up for that here in issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
But this is very much about Montoya struggling with her job, but more so the idea of like Park going through her like, okay, you're a rookie, you've got all these noble ideas of what you want to do as a police officer, but there's a lot of, elements to it that you don't predict. There's maybe we'll get to some corruption. It definitely sounds like the older cop that she's paired with is like, stop looking so naive on the world, like get some sunglasses, because if you look at this world for too long, you'll go blind. There's this kind of separation. At one point they get a description of a suspect in the car, and it's like young black male, 15 to 17, with a red hoodie, potentially armed, proceed with caution. And she's like, hey, that describes like half the people in this district. What the hell? And the guy's like, oh, well, this is just, we just do the job. It's for the DA afterwards to sort out any mess. And the big plot point in this issue is that they start chasing after this guy. She's not convinced it's really him to begin with, but this guy starts running because he gets scared, and she chases after him, and she pulls out her gun, and this guy goes for his pocket, and it's at this moment where she's probably going to have to fire. And then when you turn the page, it turns out that she didn't fire, and that the kid was only reaching for his phone so he could film the cops because he thought he was being harassed. And the actual story of this issue is that once this happens, is that the higher ups in the police force want to use this for publicity, because this is like, oh, she's a great cop. She didn't fire on this kid, and she could have, and it would have been justifiable. She made the right choice because he was innocent. And she feels guilty about this. Park is like tormented by this because she didn't choose to not fire. She just froze. She got scared and froze. She didn't like make this choice in the moment that, no, I'm not going to fire because this kid's probably innocent. She just, she doesn't feel, she starts being touted as this hero in the press, and that she's this great new example of what the modern police force should be. And she's like, I'm a fraud. And she tells her friends this, but she doesn't have the balls to tell Montoya. It's a really interesting book. It really feels like Ridley's tackling a tough subject here that he really wants to talk about and explore, and about like how a new idealistic cop might get burned out and like very quickly assimilated into the system that is what it is. And there's some really big moments where early on, like one of our friends who graduated became a parole officer, and is like giving advice to like this young kid who's like just back out in the streets, and he's like trying to give help and stuff. And he's saying things like like don't be a statistic, try and be good and all the rest of it. And his like partner's like giving him shit for even attempting to make that kind of like connection with his parolees or whatever. And there's a big thing later on where Park's in another situation, and she hears a gunshot, she runs down the street, and she's chasing the perp. It turns out to be this kid that her friend was trying to like help rehabilitate. And the cop that was with him was saying, I give it a month before we pick him up again. And like the parole officer guy is like, no, I'm trying to actually rehab people and give them a chance. But there's this really sad part where this kid immediately was involved in a shooting, and he's pulling out a gun on Park, and Park again freezes, and this kid with the red hair actually shoots another, like, an innocent civilian, and like, that's the big cliffhanger, is that Park once again has been involved in an incident, but this time her freezing has let someone innocent be shot. So it's definitely dealing with like these harder, tough issues about policing, and it's using Gotham as a conduit to do it. But it definitely feels like, no, this is something that Ridley wants to really talk about and explore. And you kind of feel that right from the get-go, that there's a lot of ideas getting into this. So I would definitely recommend. Obviously, it's not a book that seems to have sold that well, just because it is this smaller miniseries that's not really about a Batman character or anything. I mean, Montoya's kind of a Bat character, but only very tangentially.
Right. She's on the outer rims of it. But, like, it is a serious little comic book about a subject that I think it seems to be handling quite well. With these like young rookie cops, it reminds me of something like Serpico or something like that, where these young cops who have got these ideal, I'm going to be a good cop, I'm going to like help people. The phrase "to serve and protect" is brought up a lot in this issue, and like not even just because it's brought up, but it was brought up in ways that characters are talking about what it means, and kind of like I don't know, some of the hypocrisy with it, and so just it's a very interesting examination of like the young cops with the older cops and kind of their attitudes on the world around them, and maybe examining how we get into certain situations. So I'm very fascinated to see where it goes. I'm definitely up for reading issue 2. It's one of those books where it's mostly new characters who aren't like big bombastic superhero characters. They're just real people, and as a result, it feels a lot more grounded and down to earth. The fact that it's in Gotham is basically irrelevant at this point. It's not like some villain shows up. Like, Gotham Central did that, where it was like, oh, this is more realistic cops in a world with Mr. Freeze. This doesn't seem to be doing that. At least not yet, anyway. Maybe it'll do something later on, towards the end or something. But right now, this is kind of like this interesting exploration. So, no, I would recommend it. And the art, actually, I think is really... I didn't really know who Stefano Raphael was. It definitely has a very grounded kind of element to it. There's a lot of muted colors. The line work, there's a lot of good expressions on the faces. It's the sort of thing that you'd maybe expect to see in like an image book, or even in like a crime book. Like I could see, I don't know, like Brubaker being paired with this artist and it working quite well. So much of it, because it is more down to earth characters, it has to actually have performances from them as opposed to just having big bombastic action sequences. And I think it constantly gets body language and facial expressions right, and that really enhanced reading it, because it constantly felt like I was really watching a good drama as opposed to something else. So I would highly recommend it. You talk about like teaming up with Brubaker. That's Brubaker and Lark. They nail that.
Yeah.
Like, they've got Gotham Central and Lazarus. It's the body language and facial expressions.
Yeah, I'm not saying it looks like
everything that's going on.
Yeah, I'm not saying it looks exactly like Lark, but it's definitely it's achieving a lot of the same things.
Right.
So yeah, I would recommend. I might give this a 9 out of 10. I think this is a really strong issue.
I might have to revisit this. Maybe I'll pick it up if my store has physicals. Because I had things to work this week. I didn't even get to my comic shop, so I'm all on digital this week. But yeah.
It's one of those things where like I had hopes for the premise, because anytime you do just like a cop drama in Gotham, it's kind of this is kind of interesting. So I would definitely look into this, and I think maybe the one part where it is going to become relevant is like Montoya being haunted by the ghosts of her past. Is going to be the relevant sort of Gotham-y side of things, but very interesting. But maybe it'll say some interesting things about morality in the police force, and maybe it'll bring in the vigilantes and how this world gets to like skirt around it in a way that the real world can't, and that can be hard hitting on its own right.